Okay, we'll get started now. Thank you all for joining us here on this, what is cloudy, at least in Victoria, day. So I first just want to start off with a tutorial acknowledgement, both for Victoria, where I'm located, and San Diego, where Amanda is located. So the Art Gallery of Greater Victoria is located on the traditional territory of the Lekwungen-speaking peoples, today known as the Esquimalt and Songhees First Nations. And we extend our gratitude and appreciation for living on, working on this territory. And Amanda, who is located in San Diego, is located, and I'm sorry for these pronunciations, Doringo, the Pei o Kemichi, the Kupiano, and the Kalawina nations. And I just want to acknowledge that as we are on these territories, and whichever territories you are on, we need to recognize that we are working in ways that systems of historical oppression, we are working on internets that a lot of nations throughout the world cannot have access to the internet, and working on these technologies actually increases a lot of things such as climate change, which again is more substantial in a lot of Indigenous territories. So as we are spending this time together, thinking through ways that we can decolonize together. So my name is Reagan Schrum. I am the assistant curator at the Art Gallery of Greater Victoria. I am a queer and disabled individual. For visual description, I'm a fair-skinned person with long brown hair. I'm currently wearing a blue dress with pink and brown flowers and wearing glasses. If you are having any trouble, please message me through the chat box feature. And we ask that you do private messaging for the chat box. In terms of any kind of Zoom information, I just wanted to start here with, if you're having trouble with audio, making sure that you click the join audio. If you are still having trouble with the audio, there is a phone number you can phone. These are some phone numbers for different parts of Canada and the US and the UK. Our webinar number is 915-1822-9697. We ask that if you are phoning in because your audio is having trouble, that you make sure you turn off your sound on your computer. And then in terms of functions, make sure if you are accessing it that you can change your different view functions. We are offering closed captioning, which should be at the bottom of your screen as well. For accessibility, we're asking that folks don't use the chat function if possible, just because there may be individuals who have screen readers, and the screen reader will actually read out all of the chat. We do ask to, during this time, if you have any accessibility needs, one thing that Amanda and I have been talking about is if a visual description is needed during this presentation, please again, privately chat with me and I can inform Amanda so she can give those visual descriptions. And all this to say too, please use the Q&A button too at the end of the presentation. We'll have about 10 to 15 minutes for questions for Amanda, and I will be moderating that. So if you can use the Q&A button at that time. If you'd like to leave the webinar at any time, on the bottom right-hand side, there's a leave meeting button. Please do so and feel free to leave at any point. We will have a recording given to you in about 2 weeks, along with the transcript and some feedback survey. So you can access the video recording at any time that you need. And then I just want to finish off before I leave it to Amanda and introduce her, that we will be having the next Disassemble the Arts with Cyrus Marcus Wares, tentatively right now November 26th at 11 a.m., which is Pacific Standard Time. So I will actually stop sharing my screen and I will present Amanda's bio. So Amanda Cachia, received her PhD in art history and theory and criticism at the University of California, San Diego in spring of 2017, and is an independent curator critic from Sydney, Australia. Her research focuses on modern and contemporary art, curatorial studies and activism, exhibition design and access, decolonizing the museum, and the politics of disability in visual culture. Amanda has curated approximately 40 exhibitions, many of which contain social justice themes and content. She's an art history lecturer for Otis College and Art and Design at California Institute of the Arts and California State University, Long Beach. She's currently preparing her manuscript regarding the works of contemporary disabled artists, solicited by Duke University Press, in addition to editing a volume of essays currently entitled Curating Access, Contemporary Art and Creative Accommodation. So thank you, Amanda.
Thanks for having me and inviting me to be share my research with you all today. So I have a very long PowerPoint, which I'll share with you in just a minute. But you know, it's a long one, so you'll have to bear with me as I might skip over some slides. I'm going to talk for approximately 35 minutes, and then I look forward to hearing from you all during the Q&A. And as Reagan said, if anyone wants some visual description along the way, please do let me know, and I'm very, very happy to provide that for you. So I'm going to go ahead and share the screen.
And just to note, Amanda, no one has requested for visual description, so.
Okay, sure. That can absolutely change at any moment too, so just let me know if anyone puts in that request at any point. Okay.
We've actually had one request.
Okay, good. I will go ahead and do that. So I want to make sure now that you can see my PowerPoint.
Yes.
Good. Okay, great. So everybody, I'm talking to you all, as Reagan said today, about care and accessibility in the museum. That's, you know, what I've been specializing in and working in for about 10 years now, and what I focused on during my PhD. Reagan had also mentioned that I'm currently working on an edited volume of essays about this very topic, care and access in the museum. And you'll see that I'm really trying to think about access in the museum from a curatorial perspective, but also from one as an activist, and my slides will reflect that. Before I begin sort of getting into my own personal work, I did want to take a moment to really reflect on the current moment that we're in, which is the pandemic, of course, and of course, in light of all the uprisings that have taken place this year, precipitated by the death of George Floyd. And I thought I would share this image with you, which is a black and white kind of cartoon-like illustration by a Romanian artist named Dan Pajovsky. And the name of the illustration is I Can't Breathe, and it's dated 2020. And on the left, you can see kind of like this big kind of circle with spikes coming out, and there's somebody trapped kind of underneath this big heavy weight, and there's a little voice box message that comes out that says I can't breathe. And then on the right is somebody who's basically putting their knee on the person's neck, which is meant to remind us of what happened with George Floyd and the policeman. And he's saying, I can't breathe as well. So the left image is, of course, like, you know, a droplet from the coronavirus, and on the right is the George Floyd rendering. And so clearly the current moment this year is giving us an environment where we really, all of us, cannot breathe. And this is also against a backdrop of obviously climate change and all the crazy fires that have been happening from in around the world. I live in California, where we've been inundated with fires, and I'm also originally from Australia, where we also had really, really bad fires during December and January. So it just seems like the past year has been incredibly stressful on so many levels. And I just think that the artists, contemporary artists, are in a really good position to be able to reflect on this moment through their practices. But, you know, a lot of people have been asking me, well, what does the pandemic now mean for access in the museums? So, you know, we're looking at museums who have been implementing various things. And this slide says new modes of access in the museum thanks to COVID-19. These include digital access to collections now, more digital access more than ever before. Of course, we're live streaming artist talks, panels, entire conferences, similar to what I'm doing for all of you right now. We have virtual tours of collections and of exhibitions, digitization of publications, better sanitation practices, and reduced visitor numbers in the museum. So we're seeing museums taking all of these steps, which, yeah, some of them are not so new, but some of them, for some museums, are very new, and they're being really, really forced to do all of these things because of coronavirus. So what I'm suggesting in this next slide now is that we need additional new modes of access in the museum for disabled people. So I'll read out these bullet points as well. Inviting more disabled artists to participate in exhibitions and events. Inviting disabled curators to guest curate shows. Hiring more disabled curators and other positions within the museum. Hanging work by disabled artists from the collection on a regular and even more permanent basis. Buying more work by disabled artists for the collection. Film screenings and performances by disabled artists. Incorporating disabled art history textbooks in the bookshop, in educational events and tours. And, you know, as an educator, I know that there's been a really big push for decolonizing the curriculum. And so we're really making more of an effort to incorporate minority voices, particularly Black voices, into our curriculum. And my argument is we need to do that for disabled folks as well. And so my next slide actually kind of responds to that. It says here, new modes of access in the museum in response to Black Lives Matter. And these bullet points here are the exact same ones that I had on my previous slide in regards to disabled folks. So I'll read these out again. Inviting more Black artists to participate in exhibitions and events, inviting Black curators to guest curate shows, hiring more Black curators and other positions, hanging work by Black artists from the collection on a regular and permanent basis, buying more work by Black artists for the collection, film screenings and performances by Black artists, incorporating Black art history textbooks in the bookshop, in educational events and tours. So these are all the steps that museums can take. And, you know, in my opinion, these are actually not new modes of access. They're things that we've, as minority various, as within various minority groups, we've been asking for these things for a very long time. But it seems like some people are saying that this is a good moment in which to press museums to actually incorporate these things even more so, because the museums are in a climate where they're being forced to change. And so the question is, will it happen? Well, we don't know if, you know, how permanent and committed these museums will actually be. I do know that there's been some really interesting developments in some museums. For instance, I mean, some interesting developments, but also some kind of troublesome developments that museums are, because of the financial, the economic, you know, tension that this has placed on museums, have had to let go of educational staff, and it's actually conventionally education staff that work with minority audiences, particularly from my perspective, disabled audiences. So that's troublesome, but then there's other positives that have been generating a little bit of controversy nonetheless, and that's, you know, for instance, the Baltimore Art Museum here in the US, where they've sold off some of their really valuable works of art from their permanent collection, such as work by Andy Warhol, in which to actually then turn around and go and buy work by minority artists, including, from what I understand, disabled artists and Black artists, in order to make their permanent collections more representative of a diverse array of people. And so the controversy is that, you know, the museum is being given a lot of flack by the public for selling off such important work, even though in a sense the American Alliance of Museums has actually given museums permission to go ahead and deaccession in light of the financial crisis. So there's kind of a lot of heated debate about these issues at the moment, about what it takes. It seems like some museums are trying to make great strides in this area, which is really exciting and really encouraging. But then other museums are, you know, we don't know how much effort they're going to make and whether it's simply just a gesture and nothing more than that, like an empty gesture, so to speak. But having said that, you know, creative access, what does it mean on a sort of more individual artistic level for access at the moment in the time of COVID? And I know the face masks that we're all having to wear have been generating a lot of discussion amongst various groups of disabled people, including the deaf community. This is an image of a mother and a daughter. The image caption at the bottom of the image says, "Actually, Lawrence poses with her mother while they both wear a mask made for the deaf and hard of hearing community." And there's a sewing machine, and the mother and daughter are posing in the background, and they're both wearing long-sleeved grey shirts, and they're both fair white woman with blonde hair. And the mother's sweater says "relax," but they're wearing these blue face masks, and there's a cutout over their mouth. So it's just like this transparent plastic. So you can see their mouth. So when they're signing, you can still see the facial movements as well, which is critical as part of the American Sign Language. So I thought that that was a really great way of thinking through what, you know, face masks, how that actually inhibits deaf communicators. And then this is Ruth Cuthand, and she is an artist based in Saskatchewan, and she created these beautiful masks that are actually made with glass beads and thread, and they're basically the colors of the medicine wheel. And I really enjoyed this one because, you know, there's this idea of we're wearing a mask at a time of where there's a lot of people dying and a lot of people suffering from this disease, and the medicine wheel is there as sort of this healing gesture. And I saw this on Facebook. So this image on the screen right now is actually like a screenshot that I took from my Facebook account. And Ruth is looking into the camera. She's wearing pink and black glasses, and she's wearing her white mask with the medicine wheel, the beaded medicine wheels on each side of her mask. And the colors are yellow, red, and black. And she has gray hair. And then on the right-hand side, you see like all of people's comments and so on, talking about how much they actually really like her mask. And from what I understand, I think that these face masks by Ruth Cuthand are actually being acquired already by the National Gallery of Canada or the Ontario Art Gallery. I'm not sure which one, but they're getting a lot of attention. And I think they were featured in Canadian Art magazine too, which is really nice. There's been a few other little things about artists, disabled artists and their work and what they're doing to respond to the pandemic. And this is another artist, her name is Oakley Thiele, and she's based in Michigan. She's actually just moved to New York recently, but she decided to develop a project where she invited the public, particularly disabled folks, to submit letters and to submit drawings if they wanted to about their experiences with the pandemic, given that we understand that it's minority folks that have been affected by the pandemic more so than maybe the general public. And so, you know, people get an opportunity basically to talk about feelings of isolation during the pandemic, feelings of fear, lack of resources, lost jobs, lost income, and much more. And so there's a drawing that Oakley did in response to one of the letters that she received, and it's a drawing with lots and lots of rolls of toilet paper, and the letter says, "My dearest friends, I'm sorry for all the hoarders buying out all the things you actually need to survive." And so this has all been published on an Instagram account for those of you who would like to check it out. It's pretty cool. So it's the project is simply called My Dearest Friends 2020 by Oakley Thiele, and you can check that out on Instagram. I will say too, by the way, that my PowerPoint is at Reagan at the art gallery does have a copy of my PowerPoint. So if anybody wants a copy of this afterwards, you can just email Reagan and she can send it to you as a PDF. So I was kind of already saying, you know, access in the museum, what does that mean for this moment during the pandemic? And in my opinion, it's kind of like access in the museum denied before it fully takes off, or access in the museum ruptured. So it's like, you know, here we are trying to do something. This is Shannon Finnegan's work. And Shannon's kind of trying to make a point about how we never really find enough benches for us to sit down in the museum. Like we're, you know, having to walk around and look at artwork, but what if those of us need that access to be able to rest? And she creates these museum benches. There's one on the left in blue, and the writing on the bench says, "This exhibition has asked me to stand for too long, sit if you agree." So she's kind of got this activist approach towards with these benches. And then if you start looking around in public during the pandemic, you can see that actually all of the public benches have been taped off. That we're not allowed to sit in them because of the pandemic. So it's kind of this irony of asking for more access and actually we're given less in in this current circumstance. So it's a bit of a push and pull situation, and none of us can predict where it's going to go. And this is going back to Dan Pajovsky, and this image here is him again. And here he's talking about the idea of an artist abandoning their traditional canvas in order to become an activist instead with their, you know, their placards, their protest signs. And I like this image a lot because there's a big cross that the artist has placed across, you know, the artist's body and the canvas, and then there's an arrow pointing towards the protester, to say that artists have more of a role in helping to change society through the power of our images and our voices in contemporary art practice. And I really am inspired by this image and use it as a way to inspire my own work as a curator and thinking of my work in a more of an activist way. So recently I've been given a little bit of press, which is really nice. This is an Art in America article that was written by a woman named Emily Watlington, and she had written a piece called How to Make Exhibitions and Art Events Accessible. And this was published in July of this year. And it's a screenshot of me standing in a gallery space for a show that I curated about dwarfism and reframing short stature in contemporary photography. And Ricardo Gil, who has dwarfism, is one of the artists in the show, and he's giving an artist talk in the space. So he's sitting on his scooter, and then other short-statured people are standing in the room listening in. It's a black and white photograph, and you can see photographs hanging on the walls behind us as well by the two artists that were in the show, Ricardo Gil and Laura Swanson. And I curated the show back in 2014, and it was really the first time that this particular gallery in San Diego had hung work lower on the walls to make it more accessible for people of short stature, but also people who use wheelchairs, or even kids. So it really kind of was like this triple win for different types of bodies in that space. And, you know, I tried to encourage him to make it a more permanent modality. And of course, I don't think that really happened. So it's always a challenge to be a drop-in independent curator trying to be an activist and encourage new kinds of modes of access that are not conventional. So I can speak in greater detail about those challenges if anyone wants to talk about that in the Q&A. So this image was great for Emily Watlington and her Art in America article because it really was, you know, speaking to, you know, conventions that we might be able to use in our museums to change and make them more accessible for different types of bodies. And I've also written a couple of pieces, and I just wanted to share them with you if anyone wanted to look through them, which is basically a manifesto that I had developed, or, you know, guidelines for what it means to have a critical disability curatorial practice and what I might mean by creative access. So this is from a book called Interdisciplinary Approaches to Disability, Looking Towards the Future. And this book is edited by Katie Ellis, Rosemary Garland Thompson, Mike Kent, and Rachel Robertson. And then this is an article that I also wrote a number of years back now in the Journal of Visual Art Practice. And this one's called Disabling the Museum Curator as Infrastructural Activist. So if anyone, again, wants more details on these articles, it's all in the PDF that Reagan can share with you. So when we're talking about access in the museum, of course, there's many guidelines that have already been published that have been passed and, you know, assumed to be best practice, such as the Smithsonian Guidelines for Accessible Exhibition Design. And this image shows the 4 signs of access, like the wheelchair user, and it has somebody with a cane who's walking along. It has the CC for closed caption, and then it has 2 hands for, you know, looking at sign language. So these are kind of like the standard, what I consider to be the standard modes of access that every museum should really be striving towards. And these images here, this like plethora of images, also shows the standard things that we can really be implementing in our museums, such as the wheelchair ramp. And then there's an image of a really beautiful spiral type wheelchair ramp that's in the Ed Roberts Center in Berkeley in California. There's braille labels, there's large print, there's again the hands for ASL interpreters, and you can touch the artwork. We know that tactile tours are very popular of permanent collections and other types of displays in a museum. And then audio description or image description tours that people can take as well. So these are, again, all the standard things that we would expect especially in the larger museums. And there's other kinds of, apart from the Smithsonian guidelines, there are other kinds of really great resources out there for us to look at. And Carolyn Lazard is an artist who published this particular booklet called Accessibility in the Arts, A Promise and a Practice, and you can download it or listen to it. So it's just promiseandpractice.art/. And it's a pretty amazing detailed summary of what museums and galleries can actually do to implement that access in their museum. This is another one, Shape Arts in the UK. They're a really forward-thinking organization, nonprofit, who has developed also this pamphlet booklet on how to put on an accessible art exhibition. And the text on this screenshot reads, "A short guide for curators, programmers, and exhibition organizers on ensuring that the exhibition you're putting on is accessible and inclusive of disabled people." So in short, we have, you know, quite a few really, really good, powerful tools for how to implement these accessible exhibitions. But the question I always have been asking myself in my own practice is, how can access become more of a dynamic conceptual tool for interrogation in art exhibitions rather than simply a practical component, which is unfortunately often added in as an afterthought once the exhibition has been installed? So the next slide says this question: in other words, how can we think of access creatively, or how can we be creative about access? Hence this idea that I've developed over the last 10 years of creative access. So it says here, how can these components contribute to expanded notions of exhibition design that offer greater opportunities for engagement for visitors with different needs? So, you know, now that we're in the age of Zoom, again, owing to the pandemic, how can we be creative with Zoom, for instance, in our exhibitions, in our virtual exhibitions, in our captioning, in our sign language, and so on and so on. So I think that there's a lot of untapped potential for us to be exploring. This slide here has a grid, and it's 6 images that you see of different shows that I've curated over the last 10 years or so. And they have different titles. I'll read them out to you. There's Art of the Lived Experiment, Composing Dwarfism, which I already mentioned, which is reframing short stature in contemporary photography. There's a show called Sweet Gongs Vibrating that I organized. There's one called What Can a Body Do? ? There's another one called Flesh of the World. And then the last one is Loud Silence. And these are all images from the covers of the catalogs or the websites that accompanied my shows. And my talk is really not centering on the shows themselves as like thematic concepts, which, by the way, they're all related to disability in some shape or form, but more about how I utilized this creative access approach in my shows. So for me, it was, of course, hanging the artwork on the wall, and for that to make sense for my visitors. And I already talked about hanging work lower on the wall for people of short stature like myself. And this image shows an installation by the artist Carmen Papalia, and there are speakers along a hallway. And I really wanted the speakers installed so that they were at different heights, so that people of different heights could access them. And so the image on the left is where you can see a young girl who's able to actually press her ear directly against that speaker because it's installed at her height. And she's probably about 4 foot, I would say. And then this is the same image that we shared earlier, that with little people who are inside of a gallery in San Diego that are looking at black and white photographs on the wall that have been installed lower on the wall for better access. Here's another one, another show that I organized where, in fact, you know, it's a television monitor showing a video, and the video is, the monitor is actually on the floor. The screen, the television screen, has been positioned on the concrete floor of this gallery space to give, you know, even like a different mode of access completely, where everyone actually has to hunch down onto the floor. And then the images, there's drawings of wheelchairs that are also hung lower on the wall in this particular installation. So the other thing that I've been trying to do over the years with all my shows is create screen reader friendly websites. This show, Flesh of the World, and by the way, you could go and still look at this website. It's still online. It's fleshoftheworld.ca. It's a show that I did in Toronto in 2015. And I've been asking the galleries that have been contracting me to curate shows for them to, rather than publish a catalog, just to develop a website. And you can, it's not very, you can't see it too well, but there's an image on the top right that says show display preferences. And so actually this is a better image of it here, but basically people can go in and adjust the settings, you know, whether you want different color contrast, you want the text size to be bigger, line spacing, text style, etc. So this screenshot of the website just kind of demonstrates how that site can be manipulated a little bit for folks who need better access or different kinds of access. So this is, in fact, now what I ask of all my shows. If they have the money to be able to, you know, do a publication, I say no to the publication and just go for the website instead. And then I did a show last year actually as well in Sackville in New Brunswick, and we did the same thing. We just did the website. This one is called Automatisme Ambulatoire.ca, and I used the same website designer who's fabulous, and her name is Lindsay Fisher. I'll give her a plug. And she was already familiar with my work and how to develop these screen reader friendly sites, and she did say she did this one for me as well. I will say that that is Lindsay's expertise too, so she's a really great resource for museums to use. And the image that you see on this one is a woman who's inside of the ROM, the Royal Ontario Museum, who's actually doing an elaborate ASL performance. We call it a performance inside their gemstone and minerals gallery. And this image simply shows, again, the changes that you can see in the screen reader of the website. So I've talked a little bit about audio description and verbal imaging. How do you make that more creative? Well, when I've worked with various galleries that are attached to universities, I've had the opportunity to work with students. And so students will, in fact, collaborate with me and develop audio descriptions where we might have 2 to 3, maybe even 4 descriptions for one object in that exhibition. And that's really nice because you're getting multiple voices and multiple perspectives. Audio description is certainly something that is much more complex and involved than we might think. There's not one way or right way of doing audio description. And so I've always argued that the more voices involved in giving these descriptions, the more interesting it becomes for the users, whether they are blind or visually impaired or not. And, you know, there's different ways of being able to access these descriptions. We access them on devices, on your own personal devices, or maybe devices that are available at the front desk of a gallery. This is an image of somebody holding up a hand who's holding up their own personal device in order to access an artwork that's in the background that is on a yellow pedestal, and there are some glass objects on the pedestal in the background. And this is a screenshot of all of the types of audio descriptions that can be found on the exhibition website too. So if you can't actually visit the show physically, you can at least listen to the descriptions online, which is really nice. So, you know, if we had more time, I would have actually had us all do an audio description exercise, but I do this with my students. And so this is why I wanted to show you this image, is I would have my students, in order to learn the benefits of audio description, have them all practice. And that we would all, say there was 20 of us in a room, we would all have a moment to actually try and describe this, and we would actually see how varied and how different each of our approaches actually are. This slide just simply gives text of somebody's script of their audio description, which we also make available for folks who can't access that material in the audio realm. And oftentimes I'll ask my artists to actually participate in the audio description. And the artists will say, you know, I've never done that before. Like, I've never done an audio description of my own work. And they really like being able to get more involved in that, because they said it gave them more insight into their own practice. And I think that that's really beneficial for them too. So this is a slide of an audio description script that Alice Wingwall did, and this is the text that we made available in addition to that audio. And then, you know, we understand that there's also, we've used text-to-speech technology as well. So anytime I've written an essay, or the artists have supplied me with artist statements and so on, all of that has been transformed into audio format as well. And the artists sort of sometimes say, how do I do an audio description? What do I use? So I just sort of recommend to them different ways of recording their voices, and vocaroo.com is just one of these resources that you can find for free on the internet. So even though I have now dispensed with the old-fashioned catalog, if I have published a catalog in the past, normally I'll also insist that we have a CD or a DVD that has audio of every single written component published in that book. This is a show where the artists were again participating in the audio description of the images, but this is an example, and we happened to have Braille as well, Braille signage in the space. But the artist said to me, well, I only have audio in the work, so how can I describe that visually? And I said, well, then just describe the sounds that you hear. So this text that you see on the on the right-hand side is a description of the sounds. In this case, it was cats, the sound of cats purring. So the artist had a lot of fun describing that too. And then we had an artist who had given me a scent-based piece, and it was like the smell of grass. And so the artist described what that scent smelt like. And he was, you know, thinking about people who don't have a very strong sense of smell, and trying to give them better access to that smell of grass as well through his installation. This was a project that I organized where it was called Loud Silence. So it was a show that included both deaf and non-deaf folks, and we decided to make a tour of the exhibition in sign language. And I was inspired by what the Whitney Museum of American Art normally do for their audiences, which is they provide an actual video blog of it was Christine Sun Kim back then who would do this, but she would give tours in ASL, and then it would be put onto the Whitney website. And so I decided to do the same thing for my show here in California back in 2014. And I hired an ASL interpreter who, you know, walked around with me as I talked about all the work, and she signed, and we on my iPhone and made that available to folks on the exhibition's, the gallery's website. We don't have time to listen to it right now or watch it. But then the show that I had organized had also toured to UCSD, University of California, San Diego, and we were able to record the interpreter in the professional recording studio. So it was a little bit more professionally executed, but just as, you know, of course, just as effective. So I'm just a bit conscious of the time, and I might just like jump out of the presentation and see if I can fast forward a little bit to some other examples for you. This is like a good one to share with you here, in that basically, you know, when I had artists giving me video works, video installations, I would say to them, how do you make that accessible to your audiences? And so we came up with the idea together of this artist here, Raphaelle de Groot. She's based in Montreal. She told me that she would give me the actual pieces, the materials that she used for a mask that was in her video installation, and she would give me the original objects. And so we put them on the pedestal in the gallery so that folks could come along and actually touch it and listen to the crinkle of the paper and have another kind of experience instead of having to rely on just the vision alone. And we did that exact same thing again then for Darren Martin's installation, which was a video of objects floating through space. And so Darren used a 3D printer, and he printed the objects that you could see in the video, and people could come and pick those up and touch them. So you're having, again, that tactile engagement, which you might not ordinarily get if it had just been, you know, pure video. I'm more or less out of time. So Reagan, do you want to open it up to questions?
If you still have about 5 more minutes left.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, sure. Yeah, well, there was like kind of like a funny anecdote, well, not too funny, I suppose, but to share with you about this show that I had organized where we did have, you know, I'll go back to these just to remind us. So the whole point of doing this particular show was so that people could become more tactile and touch everything in the show. That was my goal. But because of the sort of lack of planning and very short timeline, unfortunately the show ended up becoming quite damaged, and the gallery kind of freaked out on me and said, no, we can't do this anymore. So then we ended up putting up please do not touch signs all over the place, which was the complete antithesis of what I had intended. And so I was really disappointed. Like, you know, this piece here is very delicate ceramic pieces, and some of them broke because of rough handling. This one here is a series of beautiful bronze gongs on the left-hand side, and they're hung from black string on the ceiling, and somebody actually came and decided to swing on them as if they were like monkey bars or something in the playground, and one of them actually broke and snapped in half. And then we ended up putting up more signage saying, do not swing from the gongs and please be gentle, and kind of having to educate the public on how to touch things, because, you know, you're telling the public all the time, do not touch, and then when you tell them, well, now you can touch, people kind of go wild, I suppose. So I ended up sitting in the gallery and for 3 weeks and just, you know, engaging with people and talking to them and kind of supervising them, so to speak, on how to touch things. So it is, you know, even though I'm a huge advocate of tactile friendly exhibits as a mode of creative access, I also think that it needs to be thought through in a really careful way, because it's something that the general public isn't used to. So what that would mean is just more planning, more kind of maybe docents in the space who can engage with the public and have conversations with them about the objects in the space, and also maybe the curator having sort of thinking about the objects that they want in the space. Like for me, I was like quite like, let's be completely uninhibited and put whatever we want in here. But I don't know if that was really very realistic of me to think in that way. Like having, you know, these ceramics is like even though the artist said, yeah, I'm okay with them being touched, in the end, when they were damaged, she wasn't okay with it. So it's, it's like a really delicate balance of conversations, these conversations that you have to have with the artist and with the audience and with the gallery that's showing the work. So yeah, these images that keep sort of show you all the signs that they ended up putting up in the space, like please handle objects carefully, and please handle the crank only, do not pull a paper strip. This is for like a music box that an artist had created where you turn a knob and the beautiful musical sounds come out, kind of like a little children's music box. But that piece ended up being damaged as well, unfortunately. So, but anyway, there's ways, this image is really sort of demonstrating my point that there's ways of having people being able to touch things without actually touching the work. And so the show that I did in Sackville last year, there was a piece by Brendan Fernandez, The Right, and it was a performance activated installation. So you kind of see this black scaffold in the middle of a space, and there's two ballerina dancers who are engaging and weaving in and out of this scaffold. And so the gallery had very cleverly provided people with visitors to the space with black straws and some kind of tape, and you could actually sit and construct like a shape that actually looked like the black scaffold in the space. So it's kind of like this little miniature model of the actual artwork in the space, so they could get a sense of the shapes and the form of it and so on. This is another workshop they did with visitors in the Sackville exhibit. And here people are using like a touch pen to engrave pieces of paper, so they become much more tactile friendly, like an embossed, kind of like they create embossed surfaces. And here again, like people who are able to like touch different shapes and so on inside of these books, these braille books, to get a sense of form and shapes and so on. Let me see. I know I am kind of still running out of time, so if I can show you, there's a lot to share, but I'll show you just maybe a couple more images here of other things that I've sort of done with artists that have been really super neat. So we'll end it with maybe with these two here. Is Wendy Jacob is an amazing artist from Boston, and she is the one who provided me with the audio installation of like where you touch a surface of a wall and you can feel the vibrations of a cat purring. And this one here is called Waves and Science Basketball. So she decided that she wanted to give me an installation of basketball players, a video installation of basketball players, but then she used this platform and this circle as a way of creating a faux basketball court. And if you go and actually sit on that platform, you can see people in this image here sitting at the back, they're sitting on the orange platform, and you can feel the vibrations of a basketball bouncing on a basketball court. And at the opening reception of this show, the Canadian Paralympic basketball team came to the opening, and they were actually wheeling around on the floor and bouncing that ball. And it was those sounds, in fact, that were recorded and fed into the subwoofers underneath that platform. And so I just loved the way that Wendy was like thinking about beyond just vision and really thinking about audio and tactile qualities to all of these various activities that we see in daily life. So I think I'm going to end it there. I have like a million more examples to share with you, but you can all, if you want more, as I said, Reagan will be happy to share with you.
Thank you so much, Amanda. We already have a question here. Someone asks, with audio descriptions, what is the best way to integrate them into a show? I have a show in December and I'm struggling how to present my audio descriptions. I was thinking of using a QR code. Any advice would be appreciated.
Yeah, I mean, there's different ways you can do it. So the QR code is a really good way of doing it. I'm not too familiar with QR code technology, so you would have to find somebody that you could talk to about that. You can also do it on, I've been doing it on my web exhibition websites, or if the museum that you're working with doesn't have the funds to do a separate website just for your show, then ask the museum to put the audio descriptions on their regular website, and just make that available as like an MP3 downloadable link that people can use. And then they can download it on their phones as they're going through the gallery space too, or just listen to it at home if they can't physically be present in the gallery.
And I have a question as we wait for people to ask questions in the Q&A box. I was just thinking through a lot of your work is so, you involve the artists, you work with and the community so much. In terms of now thinking through exhibitions in a COVID world, how are you still connecting with artists and communities in a genuine way?
Yeah, I've been having a lot of Zoom visits, studio visits. I had at least 10 in the first half of this year. And I'm currently working on a new show that I'm curating actually for here in Canada, in Ontario. And I told them that I was very interested in doing a show that was purely virtual. So what they said to me was that they want to do both. They want it to be hybrid. So we're going to do a virtual show and we're going to do an in-person, like a physical objects in a space show. So I just wanted to give them the opportunity of, working with me, that I was completely flexible and saying that we need to offer different options for people because the show is next summer and we don't know when this vaccine is coming, right, for COVID. And what if people still aren't comfortable at that point venturing out to go and look at art in a museum? I think that's really important. So I feel like staying connected to artists is actually the easy part. It's more just like thinking through how to implement, execute those exhibitions in this environment that we're in that might just be more than like the cookie cutter virtual show that we might all have in mind.
Yeah. A couple questions coming through. So someone asks, what is the best way for disabled art students to advocate for institutional change for curriculum design and delivery? And this could also be in terms of maybe staff too at museums, of trying to change institutions.
Oh, that's a hard one. You have to make friends with those in power and convince them that, the work is being done. If you have the resources, which there are plenty of resources that I shared with you today, of how to make museums accessible, how to decolonize the syllabus. I have some really, because I'm working at Otis College of Art and Design right now in Los Angeles, all of us instructors are working really hard to change up the nature of your standard art history survey class. And we have some really good resources of how to decolonize the curriculum. So if you're able to present, your bosses and your peers, your colleagues with these resources and get them to buy into what's taking place at these very other institutions across the country, here in the US and also in Canada, then, maybe they'll see that, the work is being done and that it's critical mass from your communities too is really important. So tough. It's a hard slog.
Yeah, for sure. But important one to continue to advocate for.
Absolutely. Yeah.
A person asks, how accessible are social media platforms like Instagram and Facebook for as a site for providing audio descriptions, verbal imaging, and ASL descriptions of artworks?
I mean, they're okay. I know that a lot of people within the disability community use Facebook and Instagram as an opportunity in which to actually type up descriptions, audio descriptions. And so people are doing that a lot and well. And I noticed a lot more institutions are doing that as well on their websites, on their publications. It's starting to become a thing. It wasn't a thing as much even as recent as a few years ago, but now all of a sudden it seems to be happening. But it's on the onus of the person who's writing their, like if you're posting something on Instagram or if you're posting something on Facebook, it's on you to actually write your own descriptions. And then, some shared sites on Facebook, for instance, will say that it's their policy that you write your own descriptions. And then if you don't, you're actually not going to be let into that particular group online, if that makes sense to everybody. So they're trying to make you more accountable for being aware of description and implementing that.
And we just, have a couple more minutes. So if you have any more questions, another one that has come up is that this individual works at a museum and they used to have touch tables where staff would let visitors handle objects.
Yes.
However, with COVID, they've had to remove them. Can we do touchables during COVID? Is that possible?
Yeah, I've seen a little bit of stuff about that, but not very much yet. I think people are still trying to figure out what they're going to do with that. They might have to, if they're able to do some of these things wearing masks, that would be good. Like I've seen like a lot of, not just museums with objects, but other types of, anywhere you go really, where people are wiping down surfaces in order for us to retouch them. Like especially for me, the place I'm going to more often these days is the grocery store, with my child, and putting my child into the carts, the shopping carts, and worried about contacts with surfaces in that sense, and that the people in the stores are just wiping everything down constantly. So I don't know whether that's something museums are doing. If actually, I'd open it up to all of you to say, is anyone aware of museums who are actually doing that and wiping down surfaces, if that's even a possibility, given the conservation attached to some of these objects where they might not be allowed to wipe down surfaces in the same way. So that's something that I'm not super familiar with, but I can certainly put you on to people that would be maybe more aware of that kind of work. Especially, there's a woman who works at the Metropolitan Museum in New York who is responsible for touch tours, and I know she would be a good person to speak to about that as well.
Mm-hmm. And this might just be our last question. So your comments about objects being broken from being touched makes me think of the invisible kinds of damage to art that is misunderstood or viewed in ways that can go against what the artist would want. Can you comment on this from the point of view of accessibility?
Sure.
Yeah.
I think I'll have to try and understand if I have the question.
Yeah.
Right.
I think they're asking, just thinking through maybe things that are considered broken maybe in one point of view, but maybe that's what the artist, the person is just commenting, damage to the integrity of the art is what they're talking about.
Okay. Yeah, so you're saying that to make something accessible means that it's going to damage the integrity of the art, or?
I think so. I think that is what they're saying.
Yeah, I mean, that's happened to me before, where for instance, I've asked artists to make their work more accessible, and they'll say that destroys the integrity of my work. And so that's, what do you do with that as a curator? That's really hard, because as a curator, I always feel like I'm supporting the work of an artist and trying to promote them and encourage them and so on. And then when I ask them to help me with creative access, they don't always want to do that, because they say it does interfere with the aesthetics, for instance. So they don't want to, they care less about the practical component and the conceptual aspects of access, but more just about the looks. So I think that in that case, it's a case-by-case basis, and you have to grow from that experience alongside the artist and come up with solutions that are individual and independent. And so I always say that too, by the way, about access, that it's just, there's no cookie cutter, one size fits all. It changes constantly, which what for me makes it exciting, but also super hard and challenging.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just to clarify, the person meant, I mean, these concepts shed light on other things that are important. Yeah, and unfortunately we have a couple more questions, but that is all the time that we have. Thank
Sure.
you so much, Amanda. So again, we will be sending off this recording to you folks. If you would like Amanda's PowerPoint, I can send that to folks as a PDF. And thank you so much for joining us all here. and us having you, Amanda, and your time and dedication to this.
Sure, thank you. It was a pleasure.
Mhm.